I was really, really convinced that it was my job to protect my little siblings and my mom. My father had told me that he didn't call me the whipping boy, but kind of in the sense I was. And everything I did for him was monitoring, what's the word? It was the gauge. Like that's how my father would treat the family. And so I was a living sacrifice. That's what I thought I was for my family.
Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lizbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Your host is Lizbeth Meredith. She's an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week, she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and thrivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
Persisters and brothers, I'm really so thrilled to introduce you to fellow Alaskan, Elishaba Doerksen. We'll call her Eba from here on out. When you think about someone fleeing their household in rural Alaska, running for their life to save themselves, maybe what occurs to you is it's probably a former husband, a former partner. That's the most common scenario when we think about family violence. But in her case, there was one day when she was 29 years old that she was held hostage for so long by her father, who is kind of like a family cult leader. If you've never heard that term, I mean, it's one thing to be abusive, but when people in a family where a father or a mother could do this, where they feel as though they are the only link to God and their children are trained that the only way to reach God is to follow all of their commandments, not God's commandments, but the parent. Kind of like a family cult. The children are isolated, they're mistreated, they're scared because they don't want to displease their faith. Elishaba went through all of this. I was once watching her on an episode of Evil Lives Here that was released just a couple of years ago, and I was so impressed at her courage to finally speak out and share her truth. Today, she has stage 4 brain cancer, and that doesn't stop her from living every single day with joy and contentment and sometimes despair because she is human. Elishaba is now a single mom with a child who has very profound Down syndrome and a teenage daughter, and she can no longer work to support herself. So this isn't the best of times for her, but it is the best time to get to know her, to hear her story, and support her. She has co-written a beautiful book, Out of the Wilderness. Look at show notes. If you Google Elishaba Doerksen, you will find that book is on sale, and she needs to sell those books and get them out of the warehouse. So I'm hoping that you enjoy her as much as I do. And I had heard for her story for more than a decade because I lived in Alaska and it was very well known there. I'd heard her story of victimization. Today is her story of resilience and survival. Any way we can help support her in this is fabulous by buying her book. But do know that we are going to talk about very challenging topics today. Sexual abuse, family violence, child abuse, all of that. And so it can be triggering for some. And know that her book, too, has parts that are very, very graphic. But it, more than anything, is about a story of resilience and survival. That's what I want you to take away as we listen to her. And I'm so glad you're here. Yay. This took forever to arrange, and it is very near and dear to my heart. Thank you so very much for patching in. It is a pleasure to finally see you after our phone conversations and to connect with you today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is my joy. It truly is.
I know a lot of people could go, oh my gosh, how could this happen? And I haven't been through that. But we all have a story, and each one of us experience our story in our own life. And our story is the thing that helps, I don't know, pave the way and there's a light on our path if we're willing to open our eyes and look at it, knowing that it may sound, it's a horrible story, what I've been through, but it's also something that so many people have gone through.
All of our stories are very unique in the world and the same. They're both, right?
Yeah.
They're very, and when you share your story, you empower other people to share their own.
That's the reason why I'm sharing it. It's not like I need to share my story. I just want to share it so that it's a bridge. It's a over somebody else's troubled water, and that it's something that you can relate to in one way or another, and to take courage and hope that there is a way out and that you can find a voice. And so that takes me right to the point where I was 29 years old, my birthday, and I was sitting in a room where it was really dark, and my dad had me locked in there. He told me I wasn't allowed to come out that room. And I just remember sitting there, and my whole body hurt so bad. He'd beat me and beat me for hours and hours and hours, all day long, all night long. And then he'd been wiping the kitchen floor with me day after day. And so he was afraid that someone would find me on my birthday. So I was in this little dark room, and at that point, my body wanted to give up on me physically.
And here is where there are some details to fill in for those of you who aren't familiar with her story or aren't familiar with family violence. Elishaba's father and mother moved to Alaska from New Mexico. They had to move there because they had not enrolled their kids in school. People kept finding out that they were abusing, if not neglecting their children. And so the pressure was that, they had to leave so that they wouldn't be separated as a family. Her father took her as his second wife when she was 19 years old. By that point, she had never gone to a public school, if you could imagine. She'd not made friends. Like, even if you're homeschooled, ideally, maybe you have a faith community or somebody around you, good neighbors, people to have friendships with. She and her siblings were cut off from all of that. And in the end, there were 15 siblings. Her being an elder daughter, she had to take care of these children. But then her father had her to satisfy his own needs that her mother no longer apparently satisfied. So Elishaba had not skills of literacy. She didn't have job skills. She didn't have a driver's license, a checking account, a boyfriend, dating experiences. She lived inside this world that was just she and her family. So for her to decide at the age of 29 that she was going to die if she didn't get out and reach out for help was huge. This family's was off the chart. The children had been so sequestered, so starved, isolated, physically abused, shamed, and in her case, sexually abused, that there wasn't anything to look forward to. And how do you, as a 29-year-old female, think about a life without abuse? It's all you've ever known. In her case, it was all she'd ever known. She'd not had that bank account. She'd not had any skills developed because she couldn't, that could tell her, hey, there's a life out there without this father, without this mother. So there's something beyond this. There's something to look forward to. You could learn to read fluently. You could learn to write. You could whatever. Instead, what happened for Elishaba should not be shocking. She reached out and took the first hand that reached out for hers. Someone who said, I'll rescue you. And as you can imagine, that might not always turn out well. She was not coming into a new relationship from a place of strength. She was coming to it from a place of, please save me. You seem to like me. You'll get me out of this. Together we can make a life. And that is the saddest thing is that she never had the opportunity to get as strong as she would have before life came after her.
I hadn't eaten in days, and I was in so much pain that I just looked over at this little bed where my sisters had their little spot, and tiny little window had some light coming in from outside, but it was winter. So you're talking about just a little bit of light coming in here in the winter of Alaska. And in spring, though, it was getting closer to the spring, but very cold outside, still 20 below out in the Wrangell Mountains. And so I was sitting there and I was scared to death to die because my father had told me that if I died or committed a suicide, then I would go to hell for sure. I picked up the Bible that I found on a pile of clothes and I opened up to Psalms because growing up, I didn't have any education. So I learned to read the Bible, but I couldn't find where anything was. I just tried to read along when it was on CD, or actually he had put a tape on and we listened to it. And so I tried to read along. So I went to Psalms because that's where David, as a shepherd, spoke being down in the pit and coming out again. And I just loved reading about David and his words that seemed to speak my heart. And I opened up and it said, when my father and my mother have forsaken me, it's then when the Lord will take you up. And as much as my father had just used the Bible as a weapon, really, I think I would have rather him use a gun to my head than the Bible, because the Bible was pulling apart my conscience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
He took something that should be positive and inspire resilience, and he made it a weapon against you and made you fearful.
Right. I mean, the guilt and the shame and your own spirit is so much heavier than physical pain. So much heavier. And I even someone who's gone through like emotional, even though I went through all of it, emotional abuse is almost as worse because your mind and heart is shaped around what their control and what they're trying to do. And so that was where I was at that point. But all of a sudden, that moment, I realized that I was worshiping my dad, and that God was actually promising me that he was there for me in that moment. And I loved, Psalms 23, in the valley of the shadow of death, he was there. But it was really scary. And I knew I had to get away because my older brothers had left and they gave up. They couldn't change him. And they couldn't convince me to leave because I was really, really convinced that it was my job to protect my little siblings and my mom. My father had told me that I was the Cadillac. He didn't call me the whipping boy, but kind of in the sense I was. And everything I did for him was monitoring, what's the word? It was the gauge. Like that's how my father would treat the family. And so I was a living sacrifice. That's what I thought I was for my family. And
Very well put. Yeah.
yeah, and I couldn't convince my brothers. I couldn't convince my sisters. No one understood what kind of living sacrifice I was. I had to do it. It didn't matter what I went through. I just wanted them to know how much I loved them and that was why I was there. At the same time, I was literally trying to convince my father that his own words were speaking against him and that this can't be right. At this point, he was pushing me towards actually having his kids. And there was no way of convincing him to let me live in another cabin, or I was just concerned that if I left, somebody would be killed, somebody would be hurt. And so after picking up that Bible verse, what my father meant to be evil, God used it for good because he put that in my heart to believe this God, who actually is not the God that my father was telling me about. I could hear the snow machines outside So I knew my dad was outside. And then I heard that my dad was going to go down the mountain. Of course, he couldn't take me. He said I would be too polluted by these wayward sons that had left, and he wasn't going to let me get near him. And even though he never let me out of his grip, you know, that was when I heard him say that he was going to go down the mountain and get some fuel.
And so did you. Eventually, so did, I mean, this was your great escape. And I love that story because you risked your life to save your life. And most of us can't imagine, if we imagine that happening, it's usually with an intimate partner. You know, domestic violence, intimate partner violence is very common for women. We don't expect that from a family of origin, and certainly not a family that purports to be faith-filled. And yeah, that was what you, and it wasn't a true thing. He wasn't faith-filled, but you figured that out and you went on faith to
Yes.
save yourself. And that is so amazing. I remember when that story broke that finally the secrecy was finished. And I think that's one thing that you do today is you talk about, you know, you were chosen as a second wife to your father. You took the worst beatings, although all of the kids took beatings. You really tried to be the buffer, but yet in all of this, you still found your voice and you made your way out. And that is in Alaska, no less. If some people could picture you on a snow machine scurrying away, I mean, that's fabulous. That really is. And I know it wasn't fabulous in the moment, but you did something that was intensely brave.
Thank you. Well, it was probably the bravest thing I had ever done at that point. And there was so much different abuse and trauma that I experienced. You think about it, watching my father beat and starve. I mean, I walked by our table in our little room at our house, and you know, there's my little brothers, you know, starving. I was having nightmares and trying to convince my father to change his ways. And I was a fighter, I'll tell you. I fought hard to try to convince him. I mean, even in these dreams I had that they were dying. And so he saw, I think part of it too is he saw that I was getting wiser and wiser in the sense of I was starting putting two and two together, like what he taught me. At one point, all of a sudden I see he's saying something else, and I'm using his own materials, his own words against him. And that was when I started standing up. When you watch somebody being abused and beat and hurt, there's so much trauma that happens inside of you. You feel so helpless. You feel like it's your fault, like you should have and could have and need to be the one to save that person. And I tried so many different tactics. I mean, I tried everything, even to the point where he even had me, this is hard to say, but he'd have me discipline. That's the lightest way to say it. We didn't know what anything else, any words for anything. It was just whatever he called it. And a lot of times, well, I was forced to, but when I did, I thought in my brain, well, this is better than him doing it. He'll kill him. And if I do it, he said, if I didn't, then he would do it 7 times harder. And so I thought maybe I was saving, you know, my siblings. And it's so hard to, you know, look over the things that they all went through. And so that's one huge place of trauma that I went through trying to save. I think afterwards in the last, I don't have them anymore really, but I used to have dreams after dreams of trying to feed my siblings and trying to save them over and over again. And that's something that was like my deepest longing, how I could save them from pain. And then I also went through the abuse that I didn't understand why my mom abandoned me. My dad was a child molester when I was born. I mean, he in front of her, like seriously, his stepdaughter, I mean, she was 7. And this kind of thing was going on when I was born, and he would beat me. But the truth is that he was the one that showed me affection. So I'd crawl to him and go to him because it's like mom didn't exist. And I have a different relationship with my mother than most of my siblings do. But because I was the oldest of, and then I had 5 brothers after me. So yeah, you just look at the different dynamics of it all. It's difficult when you have there's emotional abuse, there's spiritual abuse,
Right.
there's physical abuse, and there is sexual abuse and
Economic abuse. And I feel like one thing that, you and I have spoken about this before, but like he cut you off from everything that would have helped you to become independent. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be a 29-year-old trying to carve out a new life with very few reading skills and no support network out of the family, really, very little support network and no hobbies because those were idols. And anything else, everything was stripped away. And then when the community looks at a 29-year-old, they think, why didn't you just leave? You're 29. What are you talking about?
right.
They don't understand. They don't understand. They don't mean harm, that they don't understand.
My brain, my brain was taught from the time I was little that I was a part. I don't know if I've ever said these words before, but I was physically a part of my dad's body. That there was visions and dreams that he had of God, and he couldn't tell me what they were, but I was a part of him, and I was a reliving KK, his first wife that he had eloped with, and I was a reliving person. I didn't understand all that as a little girl. I just thought that was my duty, and I had to do this. And it was really weird and hard to understand and process in my brain. But there's some gifts I remember. I think back about how all these things, I smile a little bit because I say how God used all these things in my life if I'm allowing myself to see it, But one of those things is he would command me to journal. And I didn't know how to write, but I had learned listening to the scripture and watching, and nobody could read my writing pretty much but me or my dad. And I knew that I was writing. Basically, I had heard the story about the little house on the prairie. My dad had talked about it and started reading the book to us. And then he threw it into the dung hole because there was something about how Laura disobeyed her dad or something. And that was it. It was so sad. I was so sad about it. But I thought, well, if she wrote a story, I'm going to write a story. And so it's interesting to realize that I was a writer ever since I was really small. I was commanded to write. Then he would sit me down every week and I had to tell him everything that happened every day. Every day. And it's just the memory that I had in my brain was just etched in.
When you aren't able to go out to school and you're not allowed to have access to other books but the Bible, it does probably help your memory. That's the way that you coped. So pretty amazing that you could, hold on to certain things and keep it in your brain until you could write your story.
Yes.
When you left, how soon after you left on Snow Machine did they find your father? There was a manhunt, I remember. Your father had an outstanding warrant. People knew that the children were starving. They were violently abused. You were taken as a second wife. A lot was happening.
So after I escaped my dad, I stayed with a family. That's jumping ahead through the story, but I stayed with a family for about a month before it went out about my father. And then there was a warrant out for his arrest and he was on the run he had actually hid out. And it's kind of a big blur for me. And I think it was just a few weeks or later before they caught him.
Okay. And then, was it then that you met someone? How soon did you meet someone who was going to be kind of your rescuer in all of this?
It's crazy. I escaped when I was 29 years old. 3 weeks later in the woods, I couldn't go around people. I was scared to death of people. I couldn't look you in the eye. I couldn't have a conversation. Scared to death of people. My brothers talked me into coming and seeing a family. They were, already in love with their daughters. And so then I asked them to adopt me. Like, I didn't know. I was so scared, but I was so scared of my dad showing up and taking me or shooting me or something. And I was really, really scared of him. So then I was with them for about a month, and I got word that the police wanted to talk to me. And that was scary because I had never shared my story, never told anybody. In fact, even my brothers told me not to tell anybody. So I was just living with them. They knew it was what you call immoral. That's all that we could say. In fact, I didn't even know sex terms. I didn't know how to even put it to words. And so, but inside, I was in a lot of turmoil, a lot of pain, thinking about my mom and my siblings, and so worried about what was happening at home. What if I really messed up? What if somebody gets hurt? I would sit in a dark room and just cry and cry. I was so confused. And then when they said talk to the police, I didn't know. I didn't know what to do because I was told never to tell. And that's when I shared my story for the first time with the mom of the family. After that, I was there for 2 years doing homeschooling with people, little kids.
That's
So
okay.
emotional draining, the emotional part of the whole, facing the world. And then during that time, they had taken in another young man, and he was there, and we never talked. One day he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. And it was a roller coaster after that. When I got married, I thought it was the best day of my life. I was just dressed in a white dress. This was a dream. And my father had told me I could never get married. He told me anybody I married would hate me. And I was like, lies are not, they're lies, they're lies. And this is the best day of my life. And I began to grow. I began to go to meetings. I went to counseling, and I started writing my book, and I started unlayering my story. I just started growing and growing and finding my worth. And anyways, I wrote my book called Out of the Wilderness. He decided to divorce me. And so a year ago, I found out I had stage 4 brain cancer. And today I feel like a living miracle. I'm just one day at a time.
You are a living miracle.
There you go. That's the overall.
No, that is, I know you've lived a lot of life, and I want people to be able to, there are some places to find your story for sure, but Out of the Wilderness is your book. And I know you're planning to amend some things. I think in your book, as I was reading it, when I connected with you, I didn't realize that you were, at that point, you were divorcing, but now you are fully divorced. And also that I didn't know that you had brain cancer. What I could see was that you wrote and spoke about your marriage fairly glowingly. And then when it ended, you were able to say, here was what actually happened. I can only tell you from working with abuse survivors, domestic abuse survivors for years, and I'm not saying that he was that person, but I will say this, when you've been coerced and controlled in your life, it is very normal to grab the next hand that reaches out if you felt like you needed to do that, and then to try to make it work. And now, what are you showing your daughter that you never had? Because you and I were talking about that. She's
amazing.
Yeah.
She's crazy amazing. I wanted to become a counselor or something, but I don't have an EEG. And so it was just really rough. But I mean, he just always told me it's too expensive. It's too expensive. And I even found something online. It probably would have been a couple $1,000s, but I learned I was just supposed to learn by teaching my kids. And that's what I did. But then it reached a point where my daughter, she's past me. She's 16 and she could graduate this year. She's gone really good. But with my special needs son, has Downs, and he had a massive stroke 4 years ago. I was so determined to keep our family together. And so my counselor told me one day, when you were a child, your father took away your voice, and you began to believe that your intuition and how you felt was a lie, and that you shouldn't pay attention to that. And I think that's exactly what happened. I wasn't paying attention.
She knows how now. She's got maybe a bank account. She knows how to bank a little bit. She's learning life skills thanks to you. I mean, you're setting her up for a different world.
She is aware that naming what's been going on in your life and finding true friends that will stick it out with you, people who are going to like hear you, still be loyal and still be there when all is said and done. And so she's worked hard at seeing how important that is.
All things considered, you have carved out a beautiful life. Been some insurmountable odds, but against them, you've still carved out a beautiful life. And I'm just so glad that we connected and so excited that you have your book out.
When I was writing Out of the Wilderness, and Mike Yorkie was the one helping me, and he would ask me a question. And it was crazy to realize how important those little details are in our memories. Like he would ask me, now tell me about what did your bowls look like? What was your dishes like? Those little tiny details you just don't really think about as much. Oh, we had like 3 or 4 little wooden bowls, and normally we'd eat out of like a big wooden bowl, and I'd cook the food. And so those moments of fear that was instilled into my little girl's heart way back then became obvious to me as I started to uncover and see how I would react to those moments of fear.
Right.
Girl.
You get to understand your younger self and other siblings too, and understand people's roles and things. If you take the time to write your story and consider life from their lens. So I think that's so wonderful that you took the time to do that. I always tell people it's not healthy for everyone to do it. It is not. You know, if people haven't had a chance to express themselves, or if their trauma is too raw, or if they haven't had access to a really reputable therapist, it may not be a good thing for someone to sit alone with all those old memories and start writing it. But you were ready. And I'm glad you had Mike Yorkie also on your team. And I think you all did a great job. Where can people find more about your story and connect, be able to buy it and connect with you if they chose to? Because I know you still do public speaking gigs too.
I love to do public speaking anywhere, any place. I'm willing to share. Even after I had cancer, they had me come speak to all the doctors and nurses and share my story. So I love to do speaking engagements. I would love for people to call me to that. Definitely. You can find my website. It's just elishaba.com. That's ELISHABA.com. Or you can find my book, outofthewildernessbook.com.
That's right. Right
So
here.
if you go outofthewildernessbook.com, it'd be awesome if you were to buy it from that website, because my books are sitting in an area where they all are going to have to go away if I don't sell more of them, actually. It'd be awesome if I could do some more speaking engagements and share my story. Ordering my book on my website would be awesome.
Yes, everyone, let's do it. That is so exciting that you still have them available, but really important that we access that inventory. It's a wonderful story of strength and survival, and I am so thankful for our time with you today. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. I hope you enjoyed her story as much as I believed that you would. Don't forget to find the episode of Evil Lives Here if you are so inclined. Buy her book for sure. And just think about her message, which is really, we don't avoid, and we can't necessarily avoid hardships, but it's what we do with them, what beauty we create with them, and opportunities for others. That is something worth celebrating. So thanks as ever.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you for listening. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. We'll see you next week on Persistence U with Lizbeth.